Welcome back to the Game Collection. I am SuperDerek, and this is Shin Megami Tensei Persona. Persona is a series that, by now, has achieved critical acclaim and mass appeal with its most recent entries, Persona 3 and 4. But the big question everybody seems to be wondering is, should I play Persona 1? The answer just sort of depends on what you liked about Persona 3 and 4. Before there was Persona, Atlus had a series called Megami Tensei, affectionately referred to as the Mega 10 series. This sprawling collection of games featured several recurring plot themes and gameplay elements, such as moral choices with branching paths, multiple endings, and the ability to capture monsters for use in battle. Shin Megami Tensei Persona was the first game in the Mega 10 series to make it to the United States. It was released for the PlayStation in 1996 under the name Revelations Persona, and featured several changes to remove references to Japan. Characters were altered to have different hair colors and even races, and were given English names in order to try to make the game feel more American. Later, the game was released for the PlayStation Portable, which left the characters' appearances mostly unchanged. Persona is a turn-based RPG which is set in modern-day Japan. The characters that you play as have quite an arsenal, including melee weapons, automatic firearms, and the ability to conjure personality-based demons to perform attacks. New demons can be acquired by negotiating with the demons in a minigame for their spell cards. These can be fused together into new summons, which grant the users with different strengths, weaknesses, and spells. In Persona, the game starts off with a group of friends playing a game called Persona, which is supposedly a game to summon a ghost or a demon or something. Sort of like playing Bloody Mary, I suppose. Only this game apparently works. An apparition appears before them, zaps everyone into unconsciousness, setting events into motion that results in the team embarking on a quest to save their town. I've got to be honest here. At first, the story didn't really do much for me. It really didn't start to get interesting until maybe about halfway through the game, and it's a long game. Gradually, the characters began to grow on me, and the plot started to unravel with some unexpected twists that started to draw me in. If you don't mind the upfront investment, the story actually turns out to be pretty good. The gameplay was also tough for me to get into at first. Progress was slow and trudging, enemy encounter rates are high, and the enemies are tough. There are a few difficulty settings to choose from, and playing through the normal mode felt like kind of a grind. Eventually I came to learn that I was playing the game all wrong. Since this is a turn-based RPG, I kinda took for granted that melee attacks and magic would be the major source of damage. Nope. The trick to easily defeating enemies in Persona is to shoot them in the face with your gun. I'm not even kidding. For the most part, ignore your melee weapons. Magic is sometimes effective if you can exploit the enemy's weakness, but for the most part, pumping the enemies full of lead seems to do the trick. One of the things that I've always loved about the Persona games was that you could always break away from the dungeons if you wanted to and go explore a town, talk to people, join school clubs. It was sort of like a slice of life anime, which just happened to have a dark side where you fight monsters and stuff. And sometimes the two sides would intertwine and the plot thickens, but in Persona 1, this element was sadly absent. You're not really given any sort of reprieve between dungeons. In fact, even traveling between dungeons, you encounter enemies as tough as, or even more difficult than the dungeon you just finished. Plot points are revealed at the end of these dungeons, which often just points you to the next. There's no social link building either. Persona 1 is an okay looking game. The user interface is clean and usually pretty intuitive, but the visual presentation of the game also was a little disappointing. Traveling around the world map is simply moving a cursor between buildings. Exploring dungeons is a first-person grid-based dungeon crawl, and you can't really see or avoid enemies. Graphically, the presentation is a bit better on the PSP in some ways, but then there's the music. On PlayStation, the music is very dark and broody, kinda creepy, and really sets the mood well for the game, but when Persona was re-released for the PSP, they got rid of the dark, broody music in exchange for upbeat J-pop. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind the J-pop, but it just doesn't really fit in here. It's too happy. It worked better in Persona 3 and 4, but when retrofit into a game that's worked so hard to convey a darker plot, it just clashes. And it's also a bit repetitive, as there aren't very many songs in the game. Or they all just sort of blended together, I'm not sure which. Persona for the PlayStation is pretty pricey. You can get a copy for around $90. Conversely, Persona for the PSP is pretty cheap in comparison, and a complete copy will only run you about a fourth of that. But if you've got the cash, I think I would still go for the original, but only if you really want it, because the truth is that it's really just a mediocre game. But a mediocre game that nonetheless spawned the fantastic Persona series. And that's why it's got a spot in the game collection.